Okay, so this is a topic that's been covered quite a bit, but just thought I'd put my 2 cents into it. So, are Harry and Louis bound still by gag orders? So, as we all know, they sang love songs side by side, smiled at interviews with trembling lips, and blinked in perfect sync under stage lights. But by 2015, something broke, and not just the band. A silence fell, calculated, cold, and deafening. So today I ask a question the fandom has been circling for years. Are Larry Tomlinson and Harry Styles still under gag orders? Or as some of the fandom call it, the Are Louis and Harry still under Greg theory? I don't know, I got that from somewhere. I even don't know what that means. Okay, let's dive in. So the NDA theory or non-disclosure agreement theory suggests that Louis and Harry were not simply advised, but legally bound to avoid acknowledging each other romantically, professionally, and even socially. In its strongest form, the theory claims they signed multi-layered contracts prohibiting public or private acknowledgement of a romantic relationship, use of certain symbols or lyrics that could suggest intimacy, and any public behavior that could rekindle Larry rumors. So fans refer to this as the Greg Order, a playful yet ominous nod to invisible authority, contracts you can't see but feel everywhere. And in the United States, there is a way that things can be filed in court under seal. And then unless the seal is lifted, you can't see what the docket says. So this is not the same thing because that tends to be under criminal cases. Civil cases, there there are a lot of settlements that happen both in the UK and the US where you can't see what the settlement amount was because it was decided out of court anyway. So the phrase Harry cylinder becomes a cipher, which is coded shorthand for containment, and R.Louis is how many fans refer to the public facing post 1D version of Louis, controlled, guarded, and a constructed persona. And where did this theory come from? Okay, so I did a really, really quick search. So if I'm wrong about these terms, tell me. But I think the gag order theory is very commonly discussed. So I think according to what I found, and I did not do an investigative journalist search, was that the first rumblings came around 2013. Interviews were cut short, questions were deflected, but it wasn't until 2015 when Zayn left the band and Made in the AM album dropped that fans noticed something chilling. Harry and Louis, who were once inseparable, weren't to be making eye contact. And then came this now infamous Yahoo interview where Louis barely acknowledged Harry's existence. I can't find the footage for this one. I mean, I'm tired too. So apparently it wasn't subtle, it was strategic. And added this fact that every Larry question was screened or shut down on red carpets, in press junkets, even on fan Q&As. So the gag order, if it existed, it didn't feel like a metaphorical thing. It really felt legal. So how did two people go from standing shoulder to shoulder to pretending they've never met? Well, fans began documenting micro behaviors. So Louis looking visibly anxious when Harry was nearby, Harry standing back while others joked around, Louis making hostile remarks toward Larry shippers, remarks that many people believe were performative, not authentic. So even body language experts on YouTube pointed out tension patterns in their post-hiatus interviews: tight jaws, turned shoulders, anxious eye movements. This wasn't casual distance, it appeared curated, and it led many to believe that something was being suppressed. So, the music industry is no stranger to control, from Britney Spears' conservatorship to Keisha's lawsuit against Dr. Luke. Bands have seen how artists can be silenced through contracts, and Simon Cowell's Cycle label was notoriously rigid. One Direction, after all, wasn't just a band; it was a $1 billion brand. Um, it wasn't just a band; it was also a brand, as well. And then, in from 2011 to 2015, this queer visibility wasn't market safe for boy bands. So if Louis and Harry had been together emotionally, romantically, even just closely bonded, that would have disrupted the five straight heartthrob image that Psycho needed to sell. And if then that thus the NDA theory gained traction. Because control wasn't just likely, it was inevitable. I mean, we all know Lance Bass was highly influenced to stay in the closet until he finally came out, right? Because fandoms do have the development of their own language when the truth feels unspeakable. And then terms like the Greg orders, the Harry cylinder, and R. Louis are more than just memes. And if I'm wrong about these terms, tell me. So this kind of language are symbolic containers for pain, confusion, and collective grief. So this thing by a gag order represents not just an NDA, if one such exists, but a dehumanizing bureaucracy that fans imagine behind the scenes. This force that strips Louis and Harry of their freedom to live, to speak, or to even look at one another naturally. Other terms imply forced compartmentalization, especially around Harry. Harry being a very carefully managed brand, not a full human being. As well as the reconstruction of Louis, the PR managed, hostile toward Larry shippers not by choice but by contract Louis. And this coded language speaks volumes because fans feel silenced too. So now critics argue that this is all fan fiction. They point out that no NDA has ever been leaked. Well, just because it has been leaked doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And no artist has confirmed such a contract. Well, sometimes silence is the confirmation, right? But others argue that that's the point of an NDA. You cannot speak. It's literally, it's like a gag order. No one could leak one and keep the career. Look what happened to George Michael. Look what happened to other artists that dared to violate a gag order. What we do have is a consistent media erasure of their bond. PR firms on record for micromanaging image, like Modest Management, legal precedents for silence contracts in other parts of entertainment. And we also have Harry's own lyrics, which tiptoe around revelation. I'm just trying to find the truth. Been on this road so long. You know, it's not the same as it was. And Louis, his lyrical breadcrumbs are more coded, but they are more defiant. And so why does this theory still hold weight after all these years? Because the emotional truth of it has never been resolved. Fans don't just want a ship confirmed. They want closure for the dissonance, for the open wound. So the NDA theory of this gag order that dominated how Harry and Louis interacted with each other, that idea gives shape to something fans felt, even if they couldn't prove it. Because it explains why their closeness, Harry and Louis, vanished overnight, why their music feels like coded confession, why silence still screams louder than any denial. Maybe there is no document. I don't know. I mean, these documents are top secret, right? Maybe there's no contract to break. Who knows? No, unless you see the contract, which are only for the eyes of the lawyers. Maybe the silence isn't legal. Maybe it's emotional, a trauma locked in musical memory, in muscle memory. So whether it's a metaphor or reality, the legacy of this kind of gag order lives on. And not because fans need to believe in Larry, but because they once saw something real and then watched it disappear too cleanly, too suddenly, and too completely. And if you've ever loved someone you weren't allowed to speak about, you understand why this theory still matters. So, do you think that these gag orders are real? Or do you think it's Fandom's way of making sense of a heartbreak? So, personally, I would be surprised if there was not something that was governing their behavior on screen and off, on stage and off, because it's so common in entertainment that for it to be absent would actually be the shock. And especially when you look at how much money that the machine of Simon Cowell and company saw that Harry was worth from the very, very beginning. It's not it's not implausible. It's that in fact it would make business sense, and that's kind of it's like Occam's razor. What's the most obvious, the most like the what's oh god, how do I describe Occam's razor is like the most obvious conclusion is the right one kind of thing. So if you look at just from purely profit loss balance sheets, that's what that's where I would put my money is yes, there is something at least definitely dominating or steering Harry's behavior, and by consequent Louis, because they were sort of seen as a duo. Um, and how many times did they talk about freedom? Because fame has a price. And, I think that one of the things that the last couple of years, if you watch what has happened to, say, Britney Spears, to Selena Gomez, to Justin Bieber, you almost, because there's a nonstop news cycle and there's so many outlets to cover what's going on in their lives beyond the music. That statement, the price of fame, it, if anything, the last several years, you really get a bird's eye view into just how high that price is. And you hear Cher Lloyd talk about the really unusual pressures that she got when she was first this up and coming singer, and she's talked about it and why it's, to me, it sounds like she stepped back from the machine, and it makes sense. Yes, the stepping back from the machine, there is like a cost in terms of, in terms of money, in terms of fame, but honestly, it makes sense because the price is literally almost your soul. Um, so yes,